Welcome back to Outrage Science Bites. I'm David Beckmeyer, and this is day 25 of our 30-day challenge, continuing our deep dive into bridging our divides. Over the past few weeks, we've covered the core of dialogue, from handling disinformation to navigating power dynamics. Now, as we get closer to the end of our challenge, we want to bring it back to the first step an individual can take to join this movement. That brings us to our question for today: what is the first step I should take to build bridges? Answering that for us is Tania Israel, a professor of counseling psychology at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and the award-winning author of Beyond Your Bubble: How to Connect Across the Political Divide. Here's Tania.
Oh, this is such a great question. When I wrote my first book, Beyond Your Bubble, which was about how to have dialogue across political division, I started with like, how do you invite someone into a conversation? I thought that's where to start. And some people were like, this is great. This is exactly what I need. And then there were a bunch of people who said, it's lovely that you wrote this book about how to have dialogue, but I don't want to talk to those people, but I'm still kind of losing it. So what do you got for me? And so I really listened to where people were with that and the struggles that they were having. And I ended up then writing another book, Facing the Fracture, because I was like, oh, people need a lot more before dialogue. I mean, some people are ready for dialogue, but many people need something before. So what I realize people need to start with is just turning down the volume on polarizing input. We are receiving so much polarizing input from our news, from our social media, and I have to say this because I'm a psychologist, from our own minds. Our cognitive biases that we have really set us up to tune into the polarizing input, to see other people as being extreme and uninformed and biased. And when we have all that in our minds, we are not in a good place to be able to build bridges. So the very first step, I think, is recognizing we're not as far apart as we think we are. They are not all, biased, stupid haters, which is often how we're thinking about them. We're never going to want to build bridges with people like that. But there's some correction that we need to do in our minds and in what we're taking in our media diet in order to put us in a good frame of mind.
Mm-hmm. And again, I want to follow that up a little bit with like, again, I do hear from people a lot like, well, that sounds hard. Why do I want to do that?
Yeah, and it's not the easiest thing because like let's take social media for example. Social media is built and actually, the way we're getting news now, which is a lot of it through social media, it's built to sort of keep us addicted to it. Like that's how it survives is the more we pay attention to it, the more it thrives. And the way they know to get us to pay attention is to activate our emotions and to play into these biases. And, so some of it is like what media is feeding us, and some of it is that we are gobbling it up. And some of that is because that's sort of our nature to respond in that way. To sort of who's in our in group and who's in our out group and how are we going to see them. So, yeah, changing our habits is not necessarily the easiest thing. Saying, oh, I'm only going to pay attention to the news for 15 minutes a day, or I'm not going to attend to the emotionally activating content. I'm going to go find that information elsewhere. So sometimes it takes sort of behavioral things to do that. Like I set up a little charging station by my front door so I can plug in my phone when I get home, and I don't have my phone on me all the time. And that, it's a little bit inconvenient and stuff. But it takes building habits to do that. Now, building habits takes some energy. Anybody who's ever, tried to quit smoking or change their eating behaviors or start exercising knows that habit forming is not so easy, and actually habit maintaining is even harder. But we also do it because it's healthy for us. It helps our bodies and our minds and our relationships, and in this case, and our communities and our country to do this. So, yeah, it's hard, but I have a really strong motivation to do it. And here's the other thing. Even if we were not divided politically, we've got to figure out ways of dealing with being barraged by news all the time, with how we're dealing with social media. These are things that are in our environment that we've got to figure out for ourselves, for our children, like what's the healthiest way to do this. So hopefully, political division can be a motivation for us to say, okay, this is important enough that I'm actually going to try to change some of my habits.
Yeah, and another thank you, and another follow up I hear from our sort of related um, question I hear about this is okay. So I have these conversations with my neighbors, and now I respect them more, and I have empathy for them, but they're still going to vote the same way. So I didn't really do anything.
Right, right. Like I'm not getting the outcome I want, which is for them to change their views and their behavior. So why even bother? That's a great question. This is where I always go back to what's your motivation for having this conversation. And so, some people are motivated by maintaining a relationship. Maybe you want to get along with your neighbors, even if you have opposing lawn signs, because you're going to have to figure out who's going to trim that hedge in between, So there's reasons to get along with other people. And even if you are not persuading them to change their mind about an issue, you might be persuading them through your actions to change their mind about people who disagree with them on an issue. And frankly, I think that might be more important in the way our society is right now because we're divided not just because we have different views on things. We're divided by the feelings that we're having toward people who have different views. And that is actually what's much more corrosive to our friendships, our communities, our society is this vitriol and mistrust and distancing that we have with people who have different views. So just by connecting with them, we're really doing something to repair and to support our communities and our democracy.
That's all for today's episode of Outrageous Science Bites. Stay curious, and until next time, I'm David Beckmeyer. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these Science Bites episodes, you may enjoy the long-form Outrage Overload podcast at outrageoverload.net.